It started with silence, an unnatural one. My phone had stopped ringing for 3 days straight. No calls from my daughter, no texts from the church group, not even the spam calls that usually annoyed me every morning. I thought maybe the cell towers were acting up again, like last winter during the storm. But that morning, as I clutched my chest and stumbled toward the living room, that silence turned deadly. I tried dialing 911 and the phone screen flashed no service. My hands shook and I couldn't breathe. That's when I realized it wasn't the tower, it was my son-in-law. My name's Leonard Hayes. I'm 62 years old, and I've lived long enough to know that betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes hidden inside a family plan. I'd helped raise my daughter, Danielle, after her mother passed. I cooked her breakfast every morning before school, made sure her shoes were polished, and stayed up waiting for her after prom night. I thought I'd done right by her. When she married Marcus, I welcomed him like a son. I trusted him with my family, my home, even my phone bills, because he insisted he could handle everything after they moved me closer to them in Birmingham. Said it'd be easier that way. One family plan, one payment, one man taking care of things. But Marcus wasn't taking care of me. He was taking control of me. After my heart attack that morning, when I woke up in the hospital with tubes running out of me and the smell of antiseptic burning my nose, the first face I saw wasn't Danielle's. It was Marcus's, staring down at me with that half smile he wears when he's trying to look sympathetic, but enjoys being in charge. "You should have called for help earlier, Pops," he said. I wanted to scream, but my chest still ached too much. I whispered. The phone didn't work. His face didn't even flinch. He just said, "Yeah, about that. We had to make some adjustments. Too many lines on the account." That's when the rage started breathing inside me. I lay there, pretending to rest, while the monitors beeped around me. Danielle finally came in an hour later, holding flowers and crying. Marcus had told her I'd collapsed in the yard. He never mentioned that my phone had been dead because of him, and I stayed quiet, at least for a while, because I wanted to understand why. The next morning, the nurse helped me sit up and told me my phone was in the drawer. I turned it on, and sure enough, it said no active SIM. Marcus had removed my number entirely. I'd been erased like some unpaid bill. I asked Danielle about it that evening when she came by, and she said softly, "Dad, Marcus said you weren't really using it. We wanted to save you money." Her voice cracked when she said, "We." That word cut deeper than my incision. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just smiled and nodded, but something in me hardened. I decided I'd never let anyone silence me again. That night, when the hallway lights dimmed and the machines hummed like sleepy crickets, I started planning. Not revenge yet, at least not the kind that burns fast and stupid, but the kind that grows slowly, with purpose, the kind a man builds from dignity. Back home, recovery wasn't easy. The doctors warned me to take it slow. Marcus offered to set up my finances online to simplify things. I told him I'd think about it, but really, I was thinking about something else entirely. I started writing everything down in a small notebook, the passwords he'd changed, the bills he'd taken over, the lies he told Danielle. I wanted a record, not just for me, but for when the truth finally cracked open. Every morning, I walked to the corner diner where the waitress, Miss Clara, knew my name and poured my coffee before I even sat down. She was the kind of woman who could read pain before you spoke it. "You look quieter than usual, Leonard," she said one day. I told her I'd been having trouble with family, and she nodded. "Family'll break your heart slower than any disease," she said. Then she winked and added, "But you heal stronger if you don't let bitterness be the doctor." Her words stuck, but I wasn't sure I could follow them, because every time Marcus smiled, I saw that flashing "no service" on my screen again. I didn't know it then, but Marcus had been preparing his own kind of plan, one that would push me right to the edge. A week after I got home, I found out he'd taken over my Social Security account to help with taxes. Danielle had given him my login. The man had access to my life, my health, and my voice, and yet I stayed polite. I even thanked him, because I wanted him to think he'd won. Then something strange happened. My church called the house line, asking if I'd be attending the men's retreat that weekend. "We missed your confirmation online," Pastor Reed said. I didn't even know there was an online confirmation. Marcus had deleted the church app from my tablet. He'd decided, apparently, that old men like me didn't need those kinds of outings. That's when I decided to do something he would never forgive me for. I started visiting the library every morning. There, in the quiet hum of computers and whispering pages, I taught myself what Marcus thought I'd never learn, how to rebuild what he'd taken. I got a prepaid phone, a secret number, paid cash. I memorized it instead of writing it down. It was small, gray, and basic, but when I held it in my hand, It felt like freedom. Still, I didn't rush. I wanted to know exactly how far Marcus's reach went, so I waited, observed, and let him believe his control was complete. One night, Danielle invited me for dinner. I wore my best jacket, navy blue, the one she'd bought me years ago for her wedding. Marcus was grilling steaks out back. He poured himself a beer and one for me, but I refused. My doctor had warned me, but Marcus didn't need to know why. "Suit yourself," he said, his smirk visible even in the porch light. He turned his back to flip the meat, and I noticed the phone on his belt, the one connected to the same family plan that had nearly killed me. I thought about snatching it right there. Instead, I smiled and said, "You ever think about what control really costs a man, Marcus?" He laughed, not catching the weight of my words. "Costs? Control's free if you're smart enough." He raised his beer. I raised my patience. Later that night, Danielle asked me if I was feeling better. I told her yes. I even told her I was thinking of joining the church retreat after all. She seemed relieved. "Marcus said you might need a change of scenery," she said. I smiled. He's right about that. When I left, I walked slowly to my car, but inside, I was buzzing. I knew now exactly where to start. It wasn't about cutting his phone plan or confronting him. It was about reclaiming what he'd stolen, my dignity, my autonomy, and my voice. But what I didn't know yet was that Marcus had one more surprise waiting, something that would push my quiet plan into motion far sooner than I expected, because 2 days later the police came to my door. When I opened the door and saw 2 uniformed officers on my porch, I thought maybe they were there to ask about the break-ins that had been happening around the neighborhood. But the look on their faces told me this wasn't a friendly visit. The older one, a man with a buzz cut and tired eyes, said, "Mr. Hayes, we received a report from your family. Mind if we come in?" I stepped aside slowly. My heart thudded against my ribs, not from fear but disbelief. Family, Marcus. They sat me down on the couch, the same one where I'd watched Danielle take her first steps 40 years ago. The younger officer looked uneasy. "Sir," he said, flipping open a notepad, "your son-in-law contacted us. He's concerned about your well-being. Said you've been confused, maybe showing signs of memory issues. He mentioned something about unsafe behavior." I stared at them, speechless for a moment. Then it hit me. He wasn't just trying to control me. He was trying to erase my credibility. The man was laying the groundwork to make me look senile. "I had a heart attack," I said slowly. "He knows that." Maybe I looked tired but confused. "Unsafe? No, I'm just recovering." The older officer nodded. "We understand. Happens sometimes. Families overreact." But I saw it in their eyes. Doubt. They were cataloging everything. The old furniture, the unwashed dishes, the faded photos of my late wife, a lonely old man living alone. That's what Marcus wanted them to see. After they left, I stood there for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked like a taunt. Marcus had crossed a new line. He was painting me as unstable so he could take over everything. My finances, my home, maybe even my medical decisions. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, my small notebook open, and wrote every detail down. Time, date, the officers' names, what they said. I underlined one sentence 3 times. He's building a case, but so was I. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small things disappearing. My checkbook, my spare keys, the envelope where I kept my wife's old letters. Danielle said Marcus was just tidying things up, helping me get organized. I smiled, but my smile was becoming a mask I wore out of necessity. At the diner, Miss Clara noticed. "You look like a man biting down on thunder," she said, refilling my coffee. "Just family business," I muttered. She leaned closer. "Then handle it before the lightning hits you." I remember that line like scripture, so I started documenting everything digitally too. I scanned my ID, bank statements, medical records, all of it, and emailed them to a secure address I created at the library. I didn't even use my name on the account. If Marcus wanted to make me invisible, I'd learn how to live in the shadows he couldn't reach. One afternoon, Danielle stopped by. She brought a casserole and a soft apology in her eyes. "Dad, Marcus thinks maybe it's time we talk about assisted living. Just for your health, you know?" Her voice trembled. I looked at her, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to sit on my lap while I read her bedtime stories. "You think I can't take care of myself?" She shook her head quickly. No, it's just, you've been through a lot. You scared us when you collapsed." Marcus says, I interrupted softly. "Marcus says a lot of things." Her eyes watered. "Don't be angry at him. He's trying." I wanted to tell her the truth right then, that he'd cut my phone line, erased my number, lied to the police, but I stopped, because she wouldn't believe me yet. Marcus had woven his narrative too well. and I needed proof before I tore it down. So instead, I hugged her. "I'm fine, baby girl," I whispered, "but tell Marcus I appreciate his concern." And in that moment, I decided that the next time he reached into my life, his hand would come back burned. 2 days later, I saw my opportunity. Marcus showed up unannounced. He said he needed to check a few things with my utilities. He had a folder in his hand, and I could tell from the logo that it was my power company. He'd been calling them, pretending to be me. He wanted control of the account so he could start rerouting the bills through his own name, step by step, piece by piece, taking ownership of everything I had. But I'd already called the power company myself. The prepaid phone, the one he didn't know about, was my lifeline now. I'd locked my accounts with a code phrase only I could give over the phone. So when Marcus called them pretending to be Mr. Leonard Hayes, they flagged the account and marked it as fraud. That afternoon, while he stood in my living room acting like the king of the world, his phone buzzed. He stepped outside to take the call, but I could hear the tone shift. His voice went from confident to confused, then angry. He came back inside, jaw tight. "Did you change something with your utilities?" I smiled, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes, just simplifying things. "You taught me how to be efficient, remember?" He stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. That's when I knew he'd realized I wasn't as helpless as he thought. Later that evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The air smelled like rain. My heart felt steadier than it had in months. I thought about what Marcus had tried to do: silence me, erase me, discredit me, and how close he'd come. But I also knew this wasn't over. He'd push harder next time, and when he did, I'd be ready. A week passed quietly, almost too quietly. Then, one morning, I got a letter in the mail from the bank. It said my checking account had been temporarily restricted due to suspicious activity. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly who was behind it, but this time I wasn't the one caught off guard. I went to the bank in person, wearing my old navy suit and polished shoes. The teller, a young man named Avery, looked up as I approached. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. How can I help you?" I handed him the letter. "Seems someone's been trying to help themselves to my money." He frowned and tapped on the keyboard. "Yes, we flagged an online login attempt from a different IP address. Different state even. Can you tell me where?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Atlanta." Marcus had been traveling for work in Atlanta that week. I felt a calm, almost holy stillness spread through me. "Freeze every online function," I said quietly. "From now on, I'll handle everything in person." Avery nodded, impressed. "Good idea, sir." As I turned to leave, I felt lighter, because every move Marcus made from that day forward would lead him into a corner of his own making. But I had one more card to play, a quiet one. That evening, I went to see Pastor Reed. He'd been a family friend for decades, the kind of man who spoke softly but carried an iron spine. We sat in his office surrounded by shelves of Bibles and old photographs. I told him everything, from the phone plan to the police visit to the bank fraud. He listened, his brow furrowed, then said, "Leonard, this isn't just control. This is isolation. He's cutting every bridge that connects you to the world." I nodded. "Not anymore." He leaned forward. "Do you want help proving it?" I met his gaze. "I want justice, the kind that teaches him something." That's when Pastor Reed introduced me to a friend of his, retired police detective named James O'Connor. Gray hair, sharp eyes, handshake like stone. He listened to my story and said, "You've already done the hard part. You've stayed calm. Now we gather evidence." Together, we set up a quiet operation. My prepaid phone became my recorder. Every conversation with Marcus was documented, every lie saved. Emails, bank letters, call logs, all copied and secured. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Marcus called one evening, acting unusually polite. "Pops, I was thinking maybe we could move you into our guest house. That way, Danielle can check on you easier. You'd have your own space, of course." Translation: he wanted me under his roof, under his thumb. "That's thoughtful of you," I said. "Why don't you and Danielle come by Sunday afternoon? We'll talk." He didn't know it, but I'd already arranged for James and Pastor Reed to be there too, quietly, as witnesses. Sunday came, clear and bright. Danielle brought homemade biscuits. Marcus carried a folder, always a folder. We sat around the table and I asked him directly, "Marcus, did you cut my phone line?" He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Of course not. You must be mistaken." James, sitting in the corner pretending to review church papers, pressed a button on his pen. The recording began. Marcus kept lying. About the phone, the police report, the bank, everything. By the time he was done, he'd hung himself with his own words. I didn't even have to raise my voice. Danielle was crying by then. "Marcus, why would you?" He tried to defend himself. "I was protecting him. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore." That's when I said the line that had been burning in me for months. If I'm so helpless, Marcus, how did I manage to record every word you just said? He froze. The room went silent. Pastor Reed stood up slowly. I think this conversation has gone as far as it needs to. Marcus stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Danielle stayed. She looked at me, tears streaking her cheeks. Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I held her hand. I know, sweetheart. Now you do. But the story wasn't finished, because Marcus wasn't the kind of man to surrender easily, and I wasn't the kind to forgive quickly. Looking back now, that Sunday afternoon was the exact second when revenge stopped being an idea and started breathing with a life of its own. The Sunday after Marcus stormed out, my house felt like a storm's aftermath, quiet, but not peaceful. Danielle had gone home late that evening, her eyes red, her words tangled between guilt and confusion. He's not a bad man, Dad, she'd said before leaving. He doesn't know how to stop controlling things. I didn't answer. Some truths are too heavy to argue with in the dark. For 2 days, there was silence again. Not the kind that kills you like before, but the kind that watches. Marcus didn't call. Danielle didn't visit. Even Miss Clara at the diner noticed my quietness. You look like a man listening for footsteps, she said. I told her she wasn't wrong, because when you've lived as long as I have, evil doesn't retreat, it regroups. By Thursday morning, I got my first clue that Marcus was regrouping. My neighbor, old Mr. Crawley, called from across the street. Leonard, there's a young man in a suit poking around your yard. Says he's from some insurance company. Insurance. That was new. When I stepped outside, the man introduced himself as Mr. Dalton and said he was there to verify property details for a policy adjustment. Only thing was, I hadn't requested any adjustment. I asked politely who had. He flipped through his clipboard. A Mr. Marcus Hollings acting with power of attorney. That phrase hit me like ice. Power of attorney. The legal right to make decisions for me. He was trying to get it officially. I smiled and asked the man if he'd like a cup of coffee while I called my lawyer. He declined, quickly, and left. I watched his car pull away, then pulled out my prepaid phone and called James, the retired detective. He's making his move, I said. James replied, then we'll make ours. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Marcus's face when I'd confronted him. The calm arrogance, the fake sympathy, the way he'd always managed to twist concern into control. But now, he'd gone too far. He wasn't just playing with family anymore. He was tampering with law. And law, unlike family, has witnesses who don't cry. The next morning, I met with James at the diner. He'd brought a small digital recorder, a folder of documents, and that patient expression of a man who's seen every kind of betrayal and still knows how to stay steady. You're not going to win this with anger, he said. You're going to win it with truth and paperwork. I've got both, I said, sipping my coffee. He smiled. Then let's set the trap. The plan was simple. Marcus needed proof of my supposed mental decline to get power of attorney. We'd give him exactly what he wanted, except it would be proof of his manipulation instead. That afternoon, I invited Marcus over myself. I told him Danielle and I wanted to talk things through. He came alone, dressed in that polished way he always did, pressed shirt and expensive watch, a face rehearsed for charm. He greeted me with a cautious smile. You're looking good, Pops. How's the heart? Beat steady, I said. Have a seat. I'd placed a small camera, hidden behind a bookshelf, just as James instructed. Everything would be recorded. Every smirk, every lie. I've been thinking, I said. Maybe you're right about simplifying things. This whole paperwork, banking, insurance, it's a bit much for me these days. Maybe I should let you take the lead. His eyes lit up, like a snake seeing a door open. That's good, Pops. That's really good. I can take care of all the signatures. You just need to sign over the power of attorney, I interrupted, my voice calm, almost amused. He grinned. Just a formality. And what happens when that formality gives you access to everything I own? He froze, searching my face. You think I'd take advantage of you? I don't think, I said softly. I know. The silence that followed could have cracked glass. Then he laughed. You're recording this, aren't you? I met his eyes. Yes, Marcus, I am. For a second, he looked genuinely scared. Then his expression hardened. You think you can play games with me, old man? I'm not playing, I said. I'm remembering. He stormed out again, this time with more fury than before. But what he didn't realize was that the moment he'd admitted his intentions on camera, he'd sealed his fate. The next week, James helped me compile the evidence into a neat package. Emails, recordings, documents, witness statements. We took it to a lawyer, a calm, sharp woman named Ellen Pierce who didn't waste words. After reviewing everything, she leaned back in her chair and said, Mr. Hayes, You've got him. If he tries one more thing, even a phone call, I can have a restraining order in place within hours. For the first time in months, I felt the air lift from my chest. Thank you, I said. She smiled faintly. Don't thank me yet. Some men like him don't break clean. They splinter. She was right. Marcus wasn't done. A few days later, Danielle came by again. She looked exhausted. Dark circles, trembling hands. Dad, Marcus says you're trying to ruin him. He said you hired someone to spy on us. I sighed. I didn't need to hire anyone. He ruins himself just fine. She stared at me, torn between love and disbelief. He said you're making up stories, that you're paranoid. Did he also tell you about the insurance man? Or the police visit he arranged? Or the phone plan he cut while I was having a heart attack? Her eyes filled with tears. No. Then ask him, I said quietly. Ask him about those things. And when he hesitates, because he will, you'll know. She left without another word. That night, I sat alone on the porch again, the crickets humming like old clocks. I thought about the strange shape of vengeance, how it doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, patient and sharp, waiting for the right silence to fall. 3 days later, Danielle called. Her voice was small, breaking. Dad, he admitted it. Not everything, but enough. I don't even know who he is anymore. You know now, I said softly. I'm staying with a friend tonight, she said. I just need space. Take all you need, I told her. You deserve air to breathe. But part of me already knew Marcus wouldn't let her go that easily. Men like him don't lose control. They unravel it for everyone else. That night, at 11:43 p.m., I heard tires on the gravel outside. My heart jumped. I peeked through the curtains. Marcus's car. He was pacing near the porch, muttering into his phone. I could only catch pieces. Not giving up. Old fool. Ruin me. He'll see. I didn't open the door. Instead, I dialed James. Within 10 minutes, a patrol car pulled up. Marcus tried to talk his way out of it, claiming he was just checking on family. But the officers knew the story now. They asked him to leave. He did, but not before glaring at me, that cold fury burning in his eyes. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I found a note stuck under my windshield wiper. 3 words, written in black marker. You'll regret this. That was the moment I stopped being patient. That afternoon, I visited Ellen, my lawyer. I want to move forward, I told her. All the way, she nodded. Then we'll file for protective orders, asset security, and a civil claim for elder abuse and fraud. He won't see a cent of your money, and if he pushes further, it becomes criminal. It was strange how calm I felt signing those papers, like I was closing a door that had been left open too long. But vengeance, real vengeance, isn't about papers. It's about reclamation, and I wasn't done reclaiming. That night, I opened my old wooden chest, the one that had belonged to my wife. Inside were family photos, her wedding ring, and a small voice recorder I used to bring to church meetings. I pressed play, hearing her laughter echo faintly through static. For a moment, my heart clenched. She would have hated all this bitterness. She believed in forgiveness. But forgiveness only works where there's repentance, and Marcus didn't know that word. The next morning, I did something unexpected. I called Marcus myself. He didn't answer the first time. The second time, he picked up. His voice was flat. What do you want? To give you one last chance, I said. To walk away quietly. He laughed. You think you've beaten me? No, I said. I think you've beaten yourself. But if you want to keep swinging, go ahead. Just remember, every punch leaves evidence now. He hung up. That was our final conversation. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from his company. Apparently, Marcus had been suspended. They'd discovered irregularities in his client accounts after a compliance audit. Whether it was karma or consequence, I'll never know. But I do know that when you build your life on control and deceit, sooner or later, the ground gives way. Danielle came to see me a few days after that. She looked lighter, even through the sadness. He's gone, she said simply. Moved out, said he needed to find himself. I told him not to bother. We sat together in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the table. She reached for my hand. I'm so sorry, Dad, for not seeing it sooner. I squeezed her fingers gently. You saw it when it mattered. We didn't talk much after that, just sat, listening to the hum of life returning to something like normal. And yet, deep down, I knew the story wasn't over, because revenge isn't just about punishment. It's about healing, and I wasn't fully healed. Not yet. Looking back now, that night when Marcus drove away for the last time, tail lights bleeding into the darkness, I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't erase what was done. It just stops it from owning you. But I had one more surprise left for him, a quiet one, A reminder that dignity, once stolen, always finds its way home. The weeks that followed Marcus's disappearance were quieter than I expected. Danielle visited often, always bringing something homemade: chicken pot pie, banana pudding, cornbread still warm in the pan. She said she needed to cook for someone. I knew it was her way of mending the invisible wounds. Sometimes we'd sit out on the porch after dinner, the air thick with the smell of magnolias and far-off rain, and she'd ask softly, "Do you think he'll ever come back?" I'd look at the horizon, watching the streetlights blink on one by one. "Men like him always come back," I said, "but not always for the reasons you think." Because deep inside, I knew Marcus couldn't stand losing control. It wasn't about love or family or even money. It was about pride, and pride doesn't die quietly. Then one morning, as I was watering the front garden, my phone buzzed. The new one, my private line, a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering. "Mr. Hayes," a man's voice said. "This is Detective Farrow with the Birmingham Police Department. We'd like to ask a few questions about your son-in-law, Marcus Hollings." My chest tightened, but not from fear. "What about him?" "There's been a complaint. Several, actually. His company reported financial irregularities, and one of the accounts he managed was opened under your name." "Under my name?" "Yes, sir. We're trying to determine if you were aware or gave permission." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how poetic it was. Marcus had finally gone too far, and now the consequences were circling him like hounds. "No, detective," I said. "I didn't give him permission for anything." He thanked me and said they might need a statement later. When I hung up, I just stood there, letting the water from the hose drip onto the grass. The world has its own way of collecting debts. Sometimes you don't have to lift a hand. Still, I wasn't done. There was one thing left that only I could do. I went back inside and opened the drawer where I kept my old photo albums. There was a picture of Marcus and me from years ago, back when Danielle first introduced him. We were both smiling, genuinely smiling, before the rot set in. I turned the photo over. On the back, in Danielle's handwriting, were the words, "Family, forever." I stared at that for a long time, because despite everything, that word, family, still meant something to me. And if Marcus was ever going to learn the weight of what he'd thrown away, it had to come from me, not from the law. That evening, I sat at my desk and started writing a letter, not angry, not bitter, just honest. "Marcus, I once thought control was strength, that the louder man, the richer man, the one who held the paperwork and the passwords, was the one who held power. I was wrong. Power isn't control. Power is restraint. You took my voice, my number, my dignity. You tried to make me invisible, and for a while you succeeded. But every man you silence eventually learns a different language. Mine was patience. You'll face the law for what you did. That's no longer my concern. But I want you to know this. The worst punishment isn't prison or loss. It's seeing yourself clearly for the first time and realizing no one is afraid of you anymore." I sealed the letter, unsigned it, and mailed it to his company's office, the only address I still had for him. I didn't expect a reply, but 2 weeks later, one came. The envelope was wrinkled, the handwriting shaky. "Leonard, you got what you wanted. They fired me. Danielle left. I'm living in a motel outside Atlanta. You can stop now. I'm done. I don't even know who I am anymore. You were right. Control isn't strength, but neither is bitterness. You win. I hope that feels good." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and set it aside. I didn't feel triumph, just quiet. Maybe that's what real victory sounds like. Silence, not applause. That night, I walked down to the church for the first time in months. The choir was practicing, their voices rising and falling like tides. Pastor Reed saw me from the doorway and smiled. "Leonard Hayes," he said. "I was beginning to think you'd gone into hiding." "Just regrouping," I said. He nodded. "That's what the righteous do when the storm passes." During service, as I sat in the back pew, I found myself thinking of Marcus, not with hate, but with something softer, sadder, pity, maybe, because I realized then that vengeance hadn't been about him at all. It had been about me finding my way back to myself. When I left the church, I stood under the streetlight, breathing in the cool night air. The world looked different now, still unfair, still unpredictable, but manageable, mine again. The following week, I decided to do something that felt radical. I canceled every shared account, every automatic payment, every link Marcus had ever touched. Then, using the same prepaid phone that had once saved my life, I called my provider and set up a new plan entirely in my name. When the customer service rep asked, "Who referred you to us, sir?" I smiled and said, "Let's just say family." It was such a small thing, really. But when I heard that first dial tone, loud and steady, I felt something deep inside settle into place. Days passed, and life began to move in small, gentle ways again. I joined the church retreat after all. Miss Clara convinced me to go, said I'd been brooding like an owl. It was 3 days in the mountains, surrounded by men my age talking about loss, faith, and redemption. On the last night, we sat around a campfire, and one of the younger men asked, "Do you believe people can change even after they've hurt you?" I thought about Marcus, about Danielle's tears, about the silence that had almost killed me. Then I said, "People can change, but sometimes it's not about them changing. It's about you deciding they no longer get to define your peace." They all nodded quietly. The fire crackled. The stars didn't judge. They just kept burning. When I got home, there was another letter waiting. This one from Danielle. "Dad, I found Marcus's letter. I don't know if you've read it yet, but I wanted you to know. I'm done living between love and fear. You showed me what strength looks like. It's not loud, it's steady. I'm proud of you. I'm thinking about moving back closer to Birmingham, maybe start teaching again. And if you'll have me, maybe Sunday dinners like old times." I smiled as I read it, because that, right there, was the real victory. Not Marcus's downfall, but Danielle's return. That Sunday, she came over with groceries, and we cooked together. The house smelled like onions and butter and second chances. As we sat down to eat, she looked around and said, "Feels different here now." "It's lighter," I said. "The air can finally breathe." After dinner, she found the old photo of Marcus and me still tucked in the drawer. She looked at it for a long time, then turned it over. "Do you think we should throw it away?" I shook my head. "No, let it stay. We can't change the past, but we don't have to live in it either." She smiled through her tears, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the kind that forgets, but the kind that forgives without surrender. As the evening faded and she drove home, I stood on the porch again, watching the lights of her car disappear down the road. My heart beat steady. My phone sat in my pocket, humming softly with a signal strong and clear. I'd been silenced once. Now, every ring was a reminder that my voice was mine again. That's when I realized, revenge isn't always about payback. Sometimes, it's just about surviving long enough to see yourself free. But the world has a way of testing peace. A few weeks later, I got another call, this one from the detective again. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "just wanted to let you know, Mr. Hollings took a plea deal. He's agreed to repay restitution to the affected accounts. No jail time, but he'll be monitored for a few years." I thanked him, then hung up. I didn't celebrate. I didn't curse him either. Justice doesn't need witnesses. It just needs closure. That night, before bed, I took out my wife's photo from the chest and set it on the nightstand. "We made it through another storm, sweetheart," I whispered, and I finally learned that silence isn't always peace. It's just the space before your next breath. I turned off the light. The house was quiet again, but this time it was a living silence, the kind that holds you, not swallows you. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. The exact moment when revenge stopped being my engine and became my lesson. Life will always hand you people who try to take your voice. The trick is remembering you were born with more than one way to speak. And as for Marcus, well, last I heard, he's working some job 2 states away, living small, quiet. Maybe he's changed, maybe not. Either way, I'm done being his story. I'm mine again. Peace, I've learned, doesn't roll in like thunder. It arrives the way dawn does. Quiet, patient, inevitable, if you wait long enough. In the weeks after the detective's call about the plea deal, I built myself a new morning. Coffee at the corner diner, a slow walk past the community garden, a habit of polishing my shoes even when I had nowhere special to be. Old men like me measure progress in inches, not miles. Miss Clara at the diner started keeping my usual ready: black coffee, 2 eggs scrambled soft, wheat toast with a thin slice of peach preserve. "You're walking taller," she said one morning, sliding the plate onto the counter. "Whatever storm you were under, the sun has ideas about you." I laughed and told her that sounded like poetry. "Life is the poet," she said, tapping the formica. "We're just the rhyme scheme." On Thursdays, I helped Pastor Reed's team pack grocery boxes in the church basement: pasta, canned vegetables, peanut butter, oatmeal. I'd tape the tops while the younger folks loaded them into vans. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the metal elevator doors, the navy blazer hanging right, the gray in my beard finally looking like a decision rather than an accident. I'd touch the face of my old wristwatch, my wife's last gift to me, and feel the second hand tick like a promise. Present, present, present. Danielle started coming by for Sunday dinners again. We bought our vegetables at the farmer's market on 2nd Avenue, where the okra stacks up like commas and the air smells like ripe tomatoes and kettle corn. She'd talk about restarting her teaching, maybe adult literacy. I think I want my life to be useful, she said, when we were rinsing collards in the sink. Not impressive, just useful. I told her that sounded like the kind of sentence a person could build a life around. It would have been easy to pretend the past didn't happen, but I've lived long enough to know that ignoring pain is how you plant it deeper. So I kept little rituals. I wrote letters to my wife in a notebook I kept on my nightstand. I called my sister in New Orleans every Friday. I stopped by the cemetery once a month and left a flower on the graves of men I knew from the old choir. Memory isn't a prison if you visit it with the door open. One Tuesday, after grocery boxes and a quick stop at the barbershop for a trim, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single key on a brass ring and a note with an address on it, an apartment complex on the edge of town. The handwriting was familiar, not Marcus's, Danielle's. My stomach tightened the way a hand tightens around a glass, slow enough to hear the crack before it breaks. I called her. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "A request," she said. "A boundary. I moved into Unit B7. My name's on the lease. My name's on the utilities. I'm okay. But I want you to have a key, not to use it whenever you want. Just so you know I'm safe, so I know I'm not alone." I sat down on the porch steps and pressed the key into my palm. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me the truth in a way that honors it." We stayed quiet for a moment. Then she added, "He's written me a letter too. I'm not ready to share it, but I will be. I think the story isn't over, not the part that matters. But I had a plan that not even I, with all my careful steps, could have predicted. It started with a ringtone. That night, just after 9, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. The voice on the other end was strained, held together with thread. "Mr. Hayes, it's me." A pause. "Marcus." I felt the old fire flicker in my chest, then go out like a candle in wind. I didn't trust it until I heard it. Humility. Not performance. Not polished justification. Just a man whose story had stopped working. "What do you need, Marcus?" I asked, my voice even. "I don't deserve anything," he said, "but I need 5 minutes to say something that isn't about getting anything from you. 5 minutes can ruin a life or rebuild it." I told him to meet me at the church steps where the light stays on all night. Public and safe, neutral as a chessboard. I got there early and sat on the top step. The parking lot hummed with crickets. A moth circled the street lamp like it was auditioning for salvation. When Marcus arrived, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. His shoulders were still broad, his stride still economical, but something in him had stopped performing. He sat 2 steps down, like he understood geometry had moral properties after all. "Detective said you took the deal," I began. "I did," he said. "I did the things I'm being punished for. Maybe not all the things people think I did, but enough to deserve what I got." He took a breath that sounded like a decision. "My father controlled everything. House rules were iron on Sundays and melted on Mondays. He'd withdraw love like money from a checking account just to feel the balance move. I promised myself I'd never be like him. Then I learned a trick without realizing it. Control feels like safety to a boy who never had any." "You weaponized safety," I said. "I did," he answered. "And when the world clapped for me, big clients, good suits, dinners where they spell your name right on the reservation, I believed applause was honesty." He looked up at me. "You didn't applaud. You were the first person who didn't clap." I wanted to say I wasn't interested in his story. I wanted to tell him where he could put it. Instead, I let the cricket choir hold the silence until the quiet got honest. "I cut your phone plan because I wanted the button," he continued. "The one that makes another person small when you push it. I told myself it was efficient. I told myself you'd be grateful. But the truth is uglier. I liked the sound of your world getting quieter when I said so." The words didn't shock me. The confession did. It's rare to hear a man use the right verbs for his mistakes. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "This is Danielle's," he said, placing it on the step between us. "Her grandmother's ring. I held it like leverage when things got bad. You can't imagine the shame of saying that out loud." He closed his eyes, then opened them. "I'm giving it to you so I can't use it wrong again." I picked up the pouch and felt the soft gravity of the ring inside. My hand remembered the weight of it from a wedding day I'd tried to believe predicted love. "That won't fix anything," I said. "I know," he answered. "It's not a fix. It's me learning how to put things down." We sat like that for a while, 2 men in the spill of a street lamp, listening to how regret sounds when it's finished performing. "That's all I came to say." He stood. "I won't call Danielle unless she calls me. I won't step near your house. I won't pretend to be changed. I'll just do the boring work, jobs, meetings, making amends where I can. If forgiveness is a door, I'm happy to sit outside it." He walked to his car, then stopped. "One more thing," he said without turning around. "You were right. Power is restraint. I'm trying to learn that in small, unimpressive ways, like leaving you alone." I watched his taillights shrink and disappear. No triumph rose up, no rage either. Just a strange, clean emptiness. Sometimes healing isn't addition, it's subtraction. The next morning, I took the ring to Danielle's apartment. She opened the door in a gray sweatshirt and socks, hair in a pile, the end of a pencil tucked behind her ear. The place was warm in the cozy, immediate way of new spaces. Books stacked on the floor, a plant failing heroically by the window, a coffee mug on every horizontal surface like a constellation. "I have something that's yours," I said, handing her the pouch. She opened it, then looked up at me, surprise folding into relief. "Did he brought it to the church," I answered. "He said he's going to stop taking up so much space." She nodded once, like a judge delivering a careful sentence. "He doesn't get to break what he didn't build," she said softly, slipping the ring into a small dish by the sink. "But I'll put this here until I figure out what it means." I made us oatmeal and cut up some strawberries, because dignity is easier to carry when your blood sugar's steady. We ate at her little kitchen table, morning light washing the room in a color that didn't exist in the old house. 2 weeks later, Pastor Reed asked me to speak at the men's breakfast. "Not a sermon," he said, "just a testimony, how you got from silence to sound again." I told him I'd think about it. The truth is, sharing pain in public feels like a second surgery. Necessary, but you don't say yes easily. The morning of the breakfast, I wore my navy blazer and a tie my wife once said made me look like I knew the answer before the question. The fellowship hall smelled like bacon, powdered sugar, and overambitious coffee. I stood at the little podium and told the truth slowly, the way you pour hot tea so it doesn't crack the cup. I told them about the phone going dark when I needed it most, about the police on the porch, about the way control dresses up as concern and enters through the side door where manners live. I told them about patience as a language, about paperwork as a weapon against chaos, about keeping receipts, literal and spiritual. Halfway through, I paused. The room went quiet, forks suspended like punctuation. I almost stopped there, almost. But what I did instead surprised even me. "I don't need you to hate the man who hurt me," I said. "I need you to see the man I became because I thought hate was my only tool." I let the words settle. Our generation, men in their 50s and 60s, we were taught to fix things or to break them trying. No one taught us how to endure without becoming the worst thing we endured. A murmur ran through the room. Not disagreement, recognition. "I learned something in the stillness after the storm," I continued. "Control is loud. Dignity whispers. If you listen for it, it will tell you what to do next." When I finished, the men didn't clap. They stood. It wasn't applause. It was witness. A few came up to me afterward. The retired mechanic with the daughter who stopped returning calls when her boyfriend moved in. The deacon who hasn't cried since '98 but keeps a box of his wife's scarves by the bed. We spoke the language old men speak when they forget to perform. Specific, unadorned, kind. As I was leaving, a boy from the youth group held the door for me. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "my granddad passed last year. He never said things out loud like that. Thanks." He was 16 at most. A universe of impulses and cliff edges. I nodded, not because I had wisdom, but because I finally had enough peace to carry it without spilling. The next day, I found myself back at the farmer's market. The woman at the peach stall saved me a half bushel like always. "Your daughter came by earlier," she said, bagging the fruit. "Said to tell you she'll bring the ice cream if you make the cobbler." I laughed, that rare deep sound that starts in the stomach and goes out like a bird deciding mid-flight to sing. On the way home, I passed the apartment complex where Unit B7 lives its new life. I didn't stop. That was the promise. But I did slow down and look at the windows flickering with late afternoon light. No man is young again just because the sun hits right, but some afternoons do something surprisingly similar. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Not Marcus, a number from the church phone tree. "Mr. Hayes," the caller said. "This is Mrs. Dunbar from the choir. Our neighbor fell on the sidewalk outside the pharmacy. We called 911, but we can't reach his daughter. He's scared." I grabbed my blazer and the folder where I keep copies of my medical info. Habit, muscle memory. When I got to the pharmacy, the man was on the curb, head against the glass, the fear in his eyes, familiar in an unkind way. Without thinking, I dialed 911 and put the phone on speaker so he could hear the operator's voice. "Help is on the way," I kept saying. "You're not alone." That's when it hit me, not like thunder, but like morning. The full circle wasn't Marcus's apology or the plea deal or the ring in a dish by a window. It was this, standing with a stranger, a phone alive in my hand, my voice calm, The air steady, the world briefly fair. I had my signal back, not just the phone, the part of me that believes reach equals responsibility. Later, after the ambulance left and the street went ordinary again, I walked home with the slow confidence of a man who knows where the steps are even in the dark. On my porch, I sat a while and thought about how stories end, not with violins mostly, with dishes dried and put away, with clean socks, with people who promise to show up actually showing up. I called Danielle. "How about that cobbler?" I asked. "Dad," she laughed. "I already bought the ice cream." We hung up, and I took the peaches inside, the kitchen filled with sugar and cinnamon. I set the old timer, my wife's favorite, the one that ticks like an honest heart, then stood by the counter, hands on the cool edge, eyes on nothing in particular. Peace doesn't make you forget, it makes you remember correctly. I thought I was done with surprises, but life had one waiting right around the corner. As the cobbler baked and the house softened into evening, headlights swept across my living room wall, a car door closed, footsteps on gravel, not hurried, measured. I didn't stand, I didn't flinch, I waited. A knock, gentle, like a question asked by someone willing to accept no. I opened the door. "Mr. Hayes," the visitor said, voice familiar, steady. "We need to talk, not about him, about you, and something that will ask more of your dignity than your anger." I looked at the street behind them, then back at the face that carried a history I hadn't finished reading. The timer in the kitchen ticked toward a bell I couldn't yet hear. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and then decided the night didn't need its opinion. "All right," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." The woman at the door was Detective Farrow's partner, a young officer named Lydia Romero, maybe mid-30s, confident, steady eyes, the kind that carry more empathy than suspicion. She introduced herself softly, like someone aware of the space she was entering. "Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry for the late hour," she said. "It's about your case." "Well, not exactly your case anymore, more like the end of it." I nodded. Stepping aside, the smell of the peach cobbler filled the room, warm and grounding. She smiled faintly. "Smells like something my grandmother used to make. Comfort's a fine kind of evidence," I said. "Coffee?" Wouldn't say no. She sat at the kitchen table while I poured 2 mugs. Her notebook sat closed in front of her. "I just wanted to let you know officially," she began, "that the restitution process is complete. The funds Marcus misused have been returned. The accounts cleared. Legally, it's over." I nodded again. "And unofficially," she hesitated. "Unofficially, he asked us to deliver something." From her coat pocket, she pulled out a small brown envelope. My name, written neatly. She set it down on the table and didn't push it toward me. "He said you'd know when to open it. He's leaving the state for a while, starting over." I stared at the envelope, but didn't touch it yet. The clock on the wall ticked like a question. "Funny," I said. "I used to think closure came in envelopes." "Sometimes it does," she replied. "But usually it just arrives looking ordinary." She took a sip of coffee, smiled, and added, "You handled this with more grace than most people I've met in this line of work." "Grace comes cheap when you've already spent all your rage," I said. "You just trade currencies." She laughed quietly. We talked a little about Birmingham, about how the city smells different after rain, about her grandmother's cobbler recipe. When she stood to leave, she said, "If you ever want to share your story for our community outreach, people learning to spot signs of financial abuse in older adults, I think you'd help more folks than you realize." That invitation sat with me long after she left. There's a strange relief in being seen as more than the victim of something, in being seen as the teacher of it. When the door closed and her car disappeared down the street, I finally picked up the envelope. The paper was thin, like something written in a hurry but carried with care. Inside was a single sheet, folded twice. I unfolded it and read, "Leonard, I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. I'm writing because I found something that belonged to you. When I was clearing out our storage unit, I came across an old photo album Danielle said she thought was lost in the move, the one with your wedding pictures. I didn't want to mail it. I left it with the pastor. That's all. I hope you'll take it, M." I stared at the letter, then folded it back slowly. The paper trembled a little in my hand. Grief and time have the same habit. They both come back unannounced. The next morning, I went to the church. Pastor Reed was in his office, watering the fern that had somehow survived more neglect than most marriages. "You're here for the album," he said before I spoke. He dropped it off early. Didn't stay. He handed me the album, wrapped in a cloth that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I sat down in the pew and opened it. The first picture was me and Ruth on our wedding day, her veil caught in the wind, my hand halfway raised to fix it, both of us laughing too hard to care. Time froze her at 32, but the laugh still sounded alive in my memory. I turned the pages slowly. Our first apartment, Danielle as a baby in my arms, Ruth in the garden holding a sunflower as tall as she was, and then the last photo, the three of us at the lake, sunlight bouncing off the water like a secret language. I closed the book gently, rested my hand on the cover, and whispered, "We made it through, Ruth. We did." When I got home, I placed the album on the mantel beside the clock she'd loved, the one that ticked 1 second behind every other clock in the house, stubborn as truth. Then I sat down with a slice of cobbler and let the quiet feel like music. That night, Danielle called. "Dad, the officer came by my place too," she said. She told me about the outreach program. I was thinking maybe we could volunteer together. You could tell your story and I could teach the financial basics part, make it something useful. I smiled into the receiver. That sounds like the right kind of inheritance. She laughed. "What kind's that?" "The kind that spends well," I said. A few weeks later, we did it. The first meeting was in the church hall, 10 folding chairs, a pot of coffee that tasted like good intentions, a circle of people who'd all survived some version of silence. Men, women, widows, retirees, one single father who'd lost everything to an online scam. We told our stories, not as victims, but as survivors who learned to speak new languages. Mine was patience. Danielle's was forgiveness. When it was over, an older woman approached me. Her voice shook slightly as she said, "I didn't even realize what was happening to me until you said it out loud." I told her, "That's how it works. They count on your silence." She nodded, tears welling. "Thank you for breaking yours. Someone had to make the first call," I said, and meant it more than I ever had. Life didn't become perfect after that. Bills still needed paying. Knees still ached in the morning. The world still turned in its crooked rhythm, but something had shifted. Subtly, permanently, the house no longer felt haunted by betrayal. It felt lived in again. One Sunday evening, Danielle came over with takeout instead of groceries. We ate on the porch while the cicadas hummed like a choir that didn't know the words but sang anyway. After dinner, she brought out a small box. "Found this in storage," she said. "It's Mom's watch. I had it cleaned." I took it from her, feeling the smooth leather strap and the steady ticking inside. "She always said time doesn't heal, it reveals," I murmured. Danielle smiled. "Then what's it revealing now?" "That I'm still here," I said, "and that's more than enough." We sat together as the light dimmed. I noticed the reflection of the watch face catching the last of the sunset, and for a moment, it felt like Ruth was in that light, quietly approving. Later that night, after Danielle left, I took out my notebook, the same one I'd started back when Marcus cut the phone line. The first pages were filled with anger, notes, plans, evidence, but as I flipped through, the handwriting softened. The last blank page waited like forgiveness. I wrote one final entry. "Justice isn't revenge that learned manners. It's truth that stopped hiding. I've been silenced, erased, doubted, and underestimated, but I live to tell it. That's the victory. If anyone reads this one day, know this. The world will try to make you small. Let it try. Just keep your signal alive." I closed the notebook and placed it beside the phone. It felt symbolic, past beside present, both buzzing quietly with unfinished stories. The next morning, I woke early. The air smelled like dew and peaches. I brewed coffee and stepped out onto the porch. Across the street, the world looked simple again. Neighbors walking dogs, a child riding a bike with training wheels, the mail truck humming toward another ordinary day. And as I watched the world, I realized something I hadn't been able to say out loud until that moment. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything, not an apology, not even redemption. The story had already ended the only way it could, by letting me keep my voice. I walked back inside, set my coffee on the table, and picked up my phone. For a moment, I just listened to the quiet hum of it, that low static sound between connections. Then, almost without thinking, I pressed record and began speaking softly, like I was talking to the wind. "My name is Leonard Hayes. I'm 63 years old, and this is what I've learned. Silence is dangerous when you didn't choose it, but sacred when you did. Control looks powerful, but real strength is walking away without closing your heart behind you." I paused, smiled, and if you're hearing this wherever you are, don't let anyone convince you that your story's over just because it hurts. Pain's the proof that you're still writing. I ended the recording and saved it, not for me, but for someone else who might need to hear it someday. Then I looked straight into the quiet room and said, as if to an audience I could already feel leaning closer, "If you've ever been silenced, or made small, or told you couldn't take back your life, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Because stories like ours don't end, they echo, and maybe your voice is the one that wakes another up." The camera of memory would have panned out then. The porch, the man in his navy blazer, the slow rise of morning light across a healed face. No music, just the sound of the world turning, steady and alive. The phone rang once, a wrong number probably, but it rang, and that was enough. Because after everything, after betrayal and silence and loss, the line was still open, and so was I.